The bus station smelled like old coffee and something else she had stopped trying to identify 3 years ago. Tess Varn sat on the orange plastic seat with the cracked armrest and listened to her sister breathe. That was the thing about asthma. You always listened. You learned the rhythms of it the way you learned the rhythms of weather, in a place you had to live in not by studying them, but by paying attention so long that the knowledge became a part of you. The difference between the ordinary wheeze that meant everything was fine and the tighter, higher sound that meant reach for the inhaler. The difference between the night breathing and the day breathing. The difference between calm and the particular quiet that came right before a bad episode. The quiet that was not peace, but precursor. Right now, Junie was making the ordinary wheeze. Right now was okay. Right now was 2:47 in the morning, Columbus, Ohio, Terminal 9. The overhead fluorescents had that particular hum they got in the dead middle of the night when the cleaning crew was somewhere else in the building and the ticket counter was down to one person who was reading something on their phone and not looking up. And the only other person visible in this section was a man in a gray coat sleeping across 4 seats with his shoes on his mouth slightly open, completely. At peace with his situation in a way that Tess found both admirable and alien. The departure board showed 3 buses going somewhere, none of them going anywhere useful. Tess had $7.14. She had started the night with 8. She had spent 86 cents on a bag of peanut butter crackers for Junie because her sister hadn't eaten since the granola bar at 4 in the afternoon, and Junie's blood sugar did strange things when she didn't eat. That was one of the interlocking systems she managed. Blood sugar connected to airways, connected to anxiety, connected to airways, again. Everything in Junie's body was connected to everything else in a chain that Tess had been tracing and managing since she was 11 years old and had figured out that nobody else was going to do it. Not permanently, anyway. There had been people along the way. Miss Adler at the group home on Sutter who made actual breakfasts on Saturday mornings and who knew, without being told, that Junie needed her medication before she ate rather than after, and who had figured this out by observing rather than by asking. Observation was the best kind of knowledge in Tess's experience. People who observed were people you could trust with the details that mattered. The Brannock family who had them for 8 months when Tess was 13, and who had a dog named Captain who slept at the foot of Junie's bed every single night, and seemed to understand in the complete and simple way that dogs understood things that the small girl with the inhaler needed something warm nearby when she slept. Captain had been a yellow lab of indeterminate age, who smelled like grass and had the calm of an animal that had never once been surprised by anything human beings did. She had loved that dog. She had thought about Captain regularly in the years since, which told her something about the nature of attachment, that the things you missed most specifically were often the things that had made no demands on you at all. Those people had been real. Those people had mattered. She did not minimize this. In a life that had a lot of circumstances that were easier to minimize these ones, she kept full-sized. But the system was the system, and the system moved you when it needed to move you, and eventually you aged out. Tess had aged out of St. Agnes Children's Services 17 days ago, on her birthday. which was a thing the state of Ohio did without irony on a calendar that treated a person's 18th birthday as an administrative event rather than a human one. You were a dependent until midnight on the day you were born, and then you were not, and the paperwork processed accordingly. Junie had 2 more years before the system let her go too. Except, and this was the part that had taken 6 months of work and a legal aid lawyer named Marcus, who had terrible coffee in his office, and the most organized desk Tess had ever seen. Tess was Junie's legal guardian now. Had been for 3 weeks. The guardianship had come through in the slow, grinding way that legal things came through when you were navigating a bureaucracy with no money and no connections, and nothing but the understanding that the alternative was worse. She had filled out the forms. She had attended the hearing. She had answered the judge's questions in the flat, factual way she answered all official questions, giving exactly what was asked, and nothing more. And the judge had looked at her across the courtroom with an expression she could not entirely read, but that she chose to interpret as something close to respect. The guardianship was real. Junie was hers, which meant Junie was her responsibility in every practical sense, including the sense of where do they sleep tonight. The answer to that had been complicated. The family shelter on Broad Street had a 3-week wait list, which was not a number that helped them tonight. The transitional housing program for aging out youth had placed her on a list, and then placed her on a different list, and then sent her a letter explaining that funding had been restructured, which was the bureaucratic way of saying the list no longer meant what she had understood it to mean. The rooming house on 4th that Marcus had suggested turned out to have a policy about minors that applied to Junie and was non-negotiable, regardless of legal guardianship status, which she had confirmed by calling twice and speaking to 2 different people. There were other options. She had called every one of them. She had left messages. She had filled out online applications at the library on Parsons, while Junie read paperbacks at the table across from her, working through the library's collection with the systematic efficiency of someone for whom books were not entertainment, but necessity. And so she had come to the bus station, because the bus station was open all night, because the security guard on the night shift was a man named Dennis, who had the specific quality of someone who had seen enough of the world to understand what he was looking at when he saw it, and who had once, without a word exchanged between them, moved to the other end of the building when he saw Tess settle in with Junie at 11 p.m. and had not asked them to leave. That was the other skill she had developed. Reading the people who would and the people who wouldn't. You learned it fast because you had to. She shifted in the seat. Junie was curled against her shoulder, asleep now for real, the wheeze settling into the slower, deeper rhythm that meant actual rest rather than the light, fragile half-sleep she fell into when the anxiety was running. The inhaler was in Tess's jacket pocket right side, where she always kept it, not in the backpack, not in Junie's bag, but on her own body, where she could reach it in 3 seconds without thinking. The backup canister was in the backpack under. The seat wrapped in a sock because the packaging rattled, and rattling packaging had a way of pulling Junie part way out of sleep and half awake. Junie was more anxious than asleep. Junie and anxious. Airways were a category of problem she did not want to deal with at 3 in the morning in a bus station in Columbus. everything connected to everything else. She pulled out her phone. The screen was cracked in the upper right corner, where she had dropped it on concrete in March, the crack spreading in a starburst pattern across the corner. It didn't affect the function. She had learned to navigate around it the way you navigated around every inconvenience that was not going to be fixed anytime soon. Not by ignoring it, but by incorporating it into how you moved. She opened the browser, checked the shelter waitlist site. Still 3 weeks. She closed the browser. She did not let herself sit with that feeling for longer than a count of 5. Sitting with feelings was a luxury. You felt them, and then you moved. That was the deal she had made with herself somewhere around the age of 12, when she had understood that the alternative, staying in the feeling, letting it accumulate weight, produced a kind of paralysis that helped nobody, least of all Junie. You acknowledged the feeling. You noted its presence. You moved. She opened the property auction site. She had found it 2 months ago by accident, looking for cheap storage units near a neighborhood where she'd briefly thought she might find a room, and she had gone down a rabbit hole of foreclosures and county tax seizures and surplus government property, and had spent an absorbing 40 minutes looking at things she would never buy and would probably never see. A decommissioned water tower in rural Kansas, the interior rusted to orange, the exterior painted with the name of a town she had never heard of. A one-room schoolhouse in Montana with a bell still in the tower, and a photograph of the interior showing desks that were child-sized and dusty and arranged in rows as though the last class had just stepped out for recess. 40 acres of scrubland in New Mexico, with a structure on it that the listing described as a shed and that the photograph suggested was closer to a ruin. There was something about those listings that she kept returning to. Not because she could buy them. She understood money well enough to understand what she could and could not buy. But there was something in the way they cataloged the leftover edges of things, the pieces that didn't fit anywhere else, that she found she couldn't say absorbing was right exactly. More like legible. More like a language she already knew. She scrolled. Most of it was commercial property. Storefronts in small towns empty since the highway had moved, or the factory had closed, or the grocery chain had come in and taken the customer base. Some of it was land stripped of any structures, just acreage. A few listings were residential houses so far gone in disrepair that the county had seized them for back taxes, photographed bleakly in winter light, the images saying everything about why no one had bid in 14 or 30 or 60 days. She was about to close the app when the thumbnail caught her. It was bad. Blurry, taken from a distance, the image compressed until the detail was mostly lost. But something in the shape of it, something in the proportions. The way the structure sat against what was clearly a wide, flat sky pulled at a recognition she could not immediately name. She tapped it. The listing expanded. She read it twice. Then a third time, slowly, the way she read things when she was not sure she was reading them correctly. Millhaven County, Wyoming. Commercial property. Historic structure. Harlan Briggs Estate. 1.3 acres. Zoned commercial/hospitality. Assessed 2019. Minimum bid $1. Auction closes 68 hours. Current bids 0. Days on market 14. The auction had been open for 14 days with no bids, and was closing in 68 hours. She did the math. If she bid now, she would be the only bid when the auction closed. The property would be hers for $1. She tapped the photo gallery. The first photo was the same blurry distance shot. She almost closed it and went back to the listing page. Then she swiped to the second image. The second photo was better taken from a highway shoulder. Slightly elevated, the afternoon light hitting at an angle that did something to the subject that the compressed thumbnail had failed to do. And what she saw in that photograph stopped her breathing for a second. Not dramatically. Not the cinematic way breathing stopped in the movies she had watched on the library computers. Just the small particular pause of a person encountering something they were not expecting to encounter, the body taking a moment to decide what to do with the information. Because it was not a building. It was 3 buildings, 3 railroad cars, actual dining cars from what the proportions suggested was the mid-20th century. The old streamlined style, heavy and curved and substantial in the way that things built before planned obsolescence were. Substantial, connected end to end, but not in a straight line. They curved. A gentle, deliberate arc. The stainless steel exterior had weathered from whatever its original finish had been to the color of old pewter, a matte silver that still caught light in a specific way that ordinary materials did not. The curves were intact. The riveted panels along the sides. The horizontal chrome strips that ran the full 73. Meter length of the structure, like lines ruled on paper by someone who understood that a horizontal line in a flat landscape created its own kind of emphasis. In the center of the arc, at the junction of the middle car with the 2 that flanked it, a tower rose. She zoomed in, 12 meters at least. A tapered shaft of the same stainless steel as the car's wider at the base, and narrowing as it climbed, fluted in a way that suggested it had been designed rather than just erected. At the top, a compass rose in what appeared from this distance to be brass or bronze, catching the late Wyoming sun and throwing it back, brighter than anything else in the frame. 4 cardinal points ornate the kind of detailed metalwork you found on courthouses and libraries from the same era, and rising from every horizontal surface of the structure, the rooflines of all 3 cars, the window frames, the curved eaves where the cars connected the base and shaft of the tower glass tubes. Neon tubes, all of them dark and dormant, dozens of them. She counted in the photograph and stopped counting when she lost her place and started over and got 40-something before the image resolution made further counting unreliable. They traced the outlines of the structure the way a careful hand traced a drawing, following every edge, every plane change, every curve. In darkness, they would be invisible. In this afternoon light, they were a skeleton, a ghost of something that had once blazed against a Wyoming night. She swiped to the 3rd photo. The interior taken through a dusty window, at an angle that caught the main counter, a long curve of the same stainless steel as the exterior, following the arc of the central car, with stools still in place, and chrome detailing still visible through the layer of dust. Booths along the window wall, the upholstery faded to something between red and rose. In the far corner of the frame, partially visible, a jukebox. The 4th photo was the exterior again, from the rear. showing the parking lot, cracked asphalt with weeds pushing through the joints in the methodical way weeds eventually pushed through. Everything given enough time, and a single vintage fuel pump painted red, the color now reduced by sun and weather to a suggestion of what it had been. And beyond all of it, the Wyoming plain going to the horizon in every direction without interruption. The fifth photo was of a sign. She had to tilt her phone to read it because it was mounted high and photographed from below. The lettering was a style she had seen in old photographs of diners and motor courts from the 1940s and 1950s, the particular combination of serif and sans serif that meant something about the era when it was made. The Empress of Crossroads. She sat in the Columbus bus station at 3 in the morning and looked at those 5 photographs for a long time. The orange plastic seat pressed against her back. Junie's weight rested against her shoulder, warm breathing. The fluorescents hummed. 2:47 became 3 o'clock. 3 o'clock became 3:14. At 3:14, Tess did something she would think about later. Not in terms of whether it was right or wrong, that question would get complicated in ways she hadn't anticipated, and she would deal with the complications as they came. But in terms of the mechanics of the moment itself, the way she felt in the 3 seconds before she pressed the button. Not scared exactly. Not certain either. Something between the two that she didn't have a word for. The feeling of a person who has decided to move toward something before they understand fully what it is, because not moving has its own costs that are just as real. She tapped the bid field, typed the number 1, pressed submit. Current bids 1. High bidder T. Varn, $1. She put the phone in her pocket and looked at the departure board and sat with what she had just done for a moment. Then she put it away in the part of her mind where she put the things that were done and required only action. Now, not consideration. And she looked at the departure board and thought about Wyoming. She had been to Wyoming once, when she was 9, on a field trip that the St. Agnes Home had organized to Yellowstone. She remembered the geysers, the way the steam came up from the ground, in a way that seemed like it should be impossible, the earth doing something it had no right to do. She remembered the bison, which were larger than she had expected, and completely indifferent to the humans observing them from the appropriate distance. And she remembered the space, the specific quality of it, the way the landscape went on without the density and interruption of the city, without the sense that something was always right next to you. She had found it frightening at the time. She had grown up in a world where space meant something was missing. Out there, space was just what the land was. At 7:48 in the morning, she had $5.14. At 7:49, she received an email. Congratulations. Your bid of $1 was the winning bid. Millhaven County property. Auction confirmation parcel 14-892-. A known as the Empress of Crossroads, 1.3 acres. Millhaven County, Wyoming. Please contact the Millhaven County Clerk's office to complete the transfer. She read it twice. Then she opened her banking app and looked at the emergency account she had been maintaining at the county credit union. Since she was 15 years old, adding $20 whenever she could accumulate $20, to add never touching it, not for anything. Not for medications, not for food, not for the times when the math got particularly bad. She had told herself it was for a specific kind of emergency that she could not define in advance, but would recognize when it arrived. The balance was $46. She withdrew it. She bought 2 bus tickets to Cheyenne, connecting in Denver with a local service from Cheyenne to Millhaven. The total was $38.40. After the tickets, she had $12.74, plus the $5.14 already in her pocket. She woke Junie at 10. Her sister came awake the way she always did, slowly, then completely. The transition from sleep to full attention, taking about 4 seconds, her eyes clearing like something coming into focus. She looked at the bus station around them, at the departure board, at Tess's face. "We're going somewhere," Tess said. Junie looked at the board. "Okay," she said. This was the thing about Junie. 14 years old asthmatic, having spent her entire remembered life in various arrangements of the foster care system, and she said, "Okay." Not because she was incurious. Junie was curious about everything, approached every piece of new information with the same focused, systematic attention she brought to the library's collection of paperbacks. But she had learned the sequencing. First you moved, then you understood, then you asked. "Wyoming," Tess said. Junie considered this. "That's far." "I know." "Why Wyoming?" Tess showed her the photos. She had them open on her phone, the 5 photos from the listing. Junie took the phone and scrolled through them with the same deliberate attention she gave everything. She did not say anything until she had looked at all 5 images at least twice. "That's ours," she said. "It's mine, legally. But yeah." Junie handed the phone back. "Okay," she said. They got on the bus at 11:14. Tess had ridden a lot of buses. Foster care moved you in buses and station wagons, and occasionally cars that belonged to whoever was responsible for the transport, and she had learned the particular skills of long-distance bus travel, the way you learned any skill by doing it enough times that the knowledge moved from your mind to your body. How to sleep against the window with your head positioned so the vibration didn't give you a headache. How to identify the 8-hour stretch from the 4-hour one by how the other passengers settled in. How to manage Junie through the different stages of a long ride, when to walk the aisle, when to eat, how to position the jacket against the window so Junie's neck didn't cramp. But this ride was different in a way that she kept returning to over the miles. She was not being taken somewhere. She was going somewhere. The distinction seemed small until you thought about it, and then it didn't seem small at all. She had been moved by the system her entire life, from one home to another, from one county placement to another, from one school district to another. She had learned to adapt to movement, to find the useful things in it, to not attach too firmly to any specific arrangement, because arrangements changed. But the movement had always been someone else's decision. The destination had always been assigned. She had chosen this destination. She had pressed a button at 3 in the morning with $7 in her pocket, and she had chosen Wyoming. The feeling of that was something she kept examining from different angles to see if it would resolve into something nameable. Junie slept most of Ohio and Indiana. Tess did not sleep. She pulled up the county records for Millhaven and cross-referenced what she found there with the news archive of the Millhaven County Gazette, which maintained a digital archive going back to 1941. She found what she was looking for. What she was looking for without knowing she was looking for it in an issue from 1953. The Empress of Route 26. Millhaven's Crown. Jewel turns 6. She read the article 3 times. Then she read it a 4th time, slowly taking notes in the app she used for notes on her phone, the one that had been full of lists since she was 12. Lists of medications and dosages and refill dates, lists of phone numbers and addresses, lists of what needed to happen and in what order for the math to work. Now she was making a different kind of list. Harlan Briggs, born 1924, enlisted 1942, returned 1945. The article described his wartime experience in the careful, indirect language of 1953. Journalism phrases like "a great deal of experience" and "new perspectives on what community could mean," that told you, if you knew how to read them, that the man had seen things that had reorganized his understanding of what mattered and what didn't. He had bought 3 decommissioned dining cars from the Denver and Rio Grande Western Railroad in 1946. The article provided the details she found most interesting. Not that he had acquired them, but that he had specified to the railroad exactly which cars he wanted. He had traveled to the rail yard and walked the available inventory and selected these 3. Based on criteria the article didn't explain. He had then hired a fabricator in Cheyenne to connect them according to a design he had drawn himself on paper, specifying the arc configuration rather than a straight line. She found the reproduction of his original sketch included in the article. A hand-drawn elevation, the lines careful and precise, showing the 3 cars in their arc. The tower centered above the junction, and the compass rose at the top, drawn in such detail that she could make out the individual points of each cardinal direction. He had labeled each component in small, exact handwriting that she had to zoom in to read. Every measurement noted, every structural decision annotated. This was not a person who had woken up one day and decided to build a diner. This was a person who had spent months thinking about what he was building and why. The Empress had opened in October of 1947. By 1953, the article reported it was the best-known stop on the old Route 26 between Cheyenne and Casper truckers' families, on cross-country drives, salesmen working the rural routes, ranchers coming into Millhaven for supplies. The article mentioned almost in passing that on Saturday nights the jukebox ran continuously from 6 in the evening until midnight, and the parking lot held as many as 40 vehicles. She tried to imagine 40 vehicles in a parking lot in rural Wyoming in 1953, and found it worked if she could place herself in the time. If she could remember that Route 26 had been something other than a secondary highway, that before the interstates it had been the road. She found a brief mention in a 1978 highway guide. A photograph posted to a travel blog in 2009, taken through a car window at highway speed, the building still recognizable, but the parking lot empty and the neon clearly dark. A tax record showing the property in Harlan Briggs's name through 2023, which meant that as recently as 1 year ago, the man who had built the Empress was still alive enough to be in the tax system. 2023. If he'd opened the Empress in 1947 and was in his mid-20s, then he had died at 90 or 91. She put the phone away and looked at the landscape outside. Indiana had gone flat after Indianapolis, the fields stripped after the fall harvest, the sky a uniform gray that sat lower and heavier than the Ohio sky. She thought about a man who had come back from a war in 1945 with a reorganized sense of what mattered and had spent the next 70-something years building something, who had turned 3 railroad cars into a crown jewel, who had kept a $1 bid structure open for 14 days and closed it at 68 hours remaining. She thought about why you would do that. She did not have an answer yet, but she was beginning to form a shape for where the answer might be. They changed in Denver at 7 in the morning Mountain Time. Tess bought 2 coffees and a muffin at the station food counter, splitting the muffin with Junie and drinking the coffee in the 20 minutes they had between connections. The coffee was bad, but it was hot and it was something to hold, and holding something hot when you were tired and in a bus station was not nothing. She had $12.24 left after the coffees and muffin. She kept careful track. The number changed slowly enough that it didn't require a calculator. The Millhaven bus left at 8:15 and arrived according to the schedule at 2:40 in the afternoon. She slept for the first hour, the heavy sleep of someone who hadn't slept all night, her head against the window, and when she woke, they were somewhere in southeastern Wyoming, and the landscape had become something entirely other than what she was used to. The flat she had experienced in Indiana was nothing compared to this. This was flat in a way that felt geological rather than incidental, as though the land had been flattened by something ancient and enormous and had stayed that way. The grass was gold and silver, and in some places brown, moving in the wind in currents that looked like water. The sky was everything. She had thought she understood sky. She had grown up in a city where sky was what you saw between buildings and above parking lots, and she had thought that was most of what sky was. This was a correction. She was looking at the sky when the land curved slightly and the road straightened, and she saw the Empress. A mile away, maybe a mile and a half. From that distance, it caught the afternoon light, the way a mirror caught light, not sending it back exactly, but transforming it into something slightly different, slightly brighter than the source. The tower caught it first. The bronze compass rose at the top, glinting like a coin turned toward the sun. Then the arc of the 3 cars, the curved roof lines, the horizontal chrome lines still visible at this distance as the thinnest possible lines against the weathered steel of the walls. She had thought the photographs had prepared her. She had been wrong about that. "Tess," Junie said. She was at the window, too, her face closer to the glass than usual, her breath leaving small fog circles that cleared and reformed. "I see it," Tess said. The bus didn't stop there. She had known it wouldn't. The route continued into Millhaven proper, which was where the county clerk's office was, which was where she needed to go first. But they passed it, close enough that the individual neon tubes were visible, the way the glass curved and the fittings caught light. Close enough to see the parking lot, the cracked asphalt with the weeds pushing through in the patient, methodical way weeds pushed through everything given sufficient time. Close enough to see the single vintage pump out front, the red reduced by decades of sun to the suggestion of red, and the sign. She could read it now. The lettering was a style she recognized from the photographs in the 1953 article, the combination of serif and script, that belonged to a specific decade and had not really been replicated since. The Empress of Crossroads. And below it in smaller letters set slightly apart, as though added as an afterthought that had become the point, everyone welcome. The county clerk's office was a beige municipal building on Millhaven's Main Street, which was exactly as wide and low and orderly as main streets in small Wyoming towns tended to be. They made it at 4:14. Tess presented the auction confirmation email on her phone, her ID, and the notarized guardianship paperwork for Junie. She carried the guardianship papers in a waterproof folder in the backpack at all times, because she had learned that official paperwork had a way of being required at the least convenient moments, and that having it available immediately was the difference between a conversation that took 5 minutes and one that took 2 hours. The woman behind the counter was named Beverly, according to her nameplate. She was in her 50s, with the look of someone who had been processing county paperwork for a long time, and had developed a particular economy in her expressions that made it difficult to tell in advance whether she was going to be helpful or not. She looked at the confirmation email. She looked at the ID. She looked at the guardianship paperwork. She looked at Tess. "You're 18, she said. "Yes, ma'am." "You bid on this property?" "Yes, ma'am." "For $1. That was the minimum bid. Beverly looked at Junie, who was standing slightly behind Tess's right shoulder with her backpack on and her inhaler visible in the front pocket, not because she needed it immediately, but because Tess had over years developed the habit of making Junie's medical equipment visible in official situations. She had found that visible medical equipment in a 14-year-old had a way of making adults more cooperative, not out of cynicism, but because it was a piece of accurate information that changed the calculation. Beverly looked back at Tess. She looked at the paperwork one more time. Then she stamped it. "You'll want to file this at the Register of Deeds before end of business tomorrow," she said. "They open at 8. She slid the stamped paperwork across the counter. "And be advised that there's been some interest from other parties regarding this property. Your bid is valid and the auction was properly conducted, but you may want to consult with an attorney." "What kind of interest?" Tess said. Beverly's expression did not change. "I'm not in a position to speculate. I'd suggest consulting an attorney." She did not have an attorney. She had $12.24. She took the paperwork and thanked Beverly, and walked out into the Millhaven afternoon with Junie, and sat on a bench on the town square, and looked at the stamped paperwork and thought about what other interested parties might mean in the context of a building no one had bid on for 14 days. She looked at the map on her phone. The Empress was 2.3 miles east of where she was sitting on the state road. "Can you walk it?" she asked Junie. Junie checked her inhaler. This was a habitual calculation that Tess recognized the way Junie always checked before committing to physical exertion, how many doses, what the air quality was like, whether the exertion level matched the inhaler's current reserve. She did it quickly, and without making a performance of it, the way people performed calculations that had become automatic. "Yes," she said. They walked. Millhaven was small and tidy in the specific way of Wyoming. Small towns, wide streets, low buildings, the sky taking up more of the visual field than the structures competing for attention. A hardware store with a hand-painted sign. A diner with a menu board in the window. A gas station with 2 pumps and a convenience store. A bar with a hand-lettered A-frame sign on the sidewalk that said, "Happy hour starts when you do." They walked past all of it, and then they were on the state road, heading East Millhaven behind them, and the flat land opening up ahead. And there it was, getting closer this time. Not through a bus window, but under their own feet, the perspective changing. As they walked, the tower appearing first above the slight grade of the road, then the roofline of the central car, then the full arc of all 3 cars, as the road leveled and the Empress came into its full scale. She had thought from the bus that the scale might be distorted by the emptiness around it. The way a single tree on a flat plain looked taller than it was because there was nothing to compare it to. She had been wrong about that too. Up close, the Empress was simply large. She paced the exterior later and got 74 meters. The individual components were visible now in a way the photographs had not conveyed the specific pattern of the rivets in the steel panels, the depth of the horizontal chrome strips, the way the glass of the windows was thick and slightly greenish, in the way that old glass was curved to follow the arc of the car. The tower was directly above the center of the arc, and close up it was more impressive than from the road, 12 meters of tapered steel, with the compass rose at the top, and on each face of the tower set into the steel in raised lettering, the name, the Empress of Crossroads. 4 faces, 4 directions, the same name on each one. In case you were coming from any direction. In case you couldn't see one face from where you were standing. She walked the full exterior length. Junie walked beside her. Neither of them said anything for most of it. There was something about the building that made conversation feel unnecessary. Not intimidating Tess was not often intimidated by things had spent too much of her life in situations that required the opposite of intimidation, but requiring of a certain quiet attention. The building was making a claim about itself by existing, and it deserved to be received. She counted the neon tubes, 47. She lost count twice and started over and got 47 both times. The front door was a heavy glass and chrome affair, the chrome slightly corroded, but the glass intact, a push bar across the center at chest height. The lock was a standard deadbolt, with the keyhole worn smooth from long use. Beverly had given her the key, old heavy brass, the kind of key that had been copied from a copy original, until the edges were slightly imprecise, but it functioned. She put it in the lock. The lock turned. The door swung open. The smell hit her first. Not decay, not mold or rot or the particular staleness of enclosed air that had been sealed too long. It was something older and more complex, grease and coffee. The deep industrial residue of decades of cooking and serving baked into the walls and the counter surfaces and the floor until it had become structural rather than incidental. The smell of a place that had operated at full capacity for years and had absorbed every bit of that operation into itself. And under that metal, brass and stainless, steel, and the clean, cold smell of materials that had been built to last and had. The light was sufficient. The western wall of the central car was windows for its full length, and the afternoon sun came through them at a low angle, the light catching the chrome on the counter, and the chrome on the stools, and the chrome edging on every surface. Everything reflected slightly. The effect was of being inside something that generated its own light, which was the intended effect. She would understand this later, when she found the design notes that Harlan had thought carefully about how the light would work inside the building at different times of day, and had made decisions accordingly. She stood at the entrance for a moment and let her eyes adjust. The counter ran the full arc of the central section. 30 meters of stainless steel curved to match the car's exterior curve, polished once, and then allowed to age in place. The surface was dusty but intact, with no significant scratches or damage. Behind it on the wall, a pass-through window to the kitchen, the frame still hinged, the glass still in it. Shelves where coffee mugs had been stored upside down, still there, still upside down, a dozen of them, in a row, dusty but unbroken. A hand-lettered price board, the prices from whenever the Empress had last been operating numbers that were simultaneously historical artifacts and evidence of how long the building had been standing empty. The booths along the exterior wall were the red vinyl from the photographs. The color faded to something between rose and dusty pink that was not unattractive. It was the color of something that had been through enough sun to become quieter. The tables between the booths were white, laminate still clean. The salt and pepper shakers were still on the tables. Some of them still had contents. She walked to the pass-through and looked through it. The kitchen was behind the central car, connected at the rear. Commercial range 4 burners, a grill section still intact. Refrigeration units doors standing slightly open the way you left. Refrigerator doors when you were closing a building and wanted the interior not to develop issues. A prep counter, long, stainless, with a cutting board slot at one end. Industrial shelving along one wall, mostly empty. A walk-in cooler, the door propped open, empty and clean. She walked the kitchen methodically, opening every cabinet and drawer, making the list in her head. What was here? What condition it was in? What would be needed and in what sequence? And then she saw the floor. The kitchen floor was white hexagonal tile with black grout. A classic pattern she recognized from the photographs of old diners she had found in her research overnight. But in the far left corner of the kitchen, partially hidden by a large commercial refrigerator that was positioned slightly away from the wall, not flush in a way that suggested it had been moved from its original position, the tile was different. Not different in color. Different in age. The tile in that corner was newer. The grout was less yellowed. The tiles themselves were slightly brighter. The glaze less worn. Someone had retiled a section of the kitchen floor, approximately 6 feet by 6 feet, at some point after the original installation, and the refrigerator had been moved from directly in front of it, leaving indentation marks in the older tile around the edges of the newer section, from years of sitting in one position. She looked at the newer tile section. In the center of it, barely visible, because it was set flush with the surrounding tiles, a recessed metal ring, a pull handle. She crossed the kitchen and pushed the refrigerator. It was heavy. Commercial refrigerators were always heavier than they looked, and it moved slowly, the rubber feet dragging on the tile. She put her full weight into it, her boots finding what grip was available, and it moved an inch at a time, then a foot, then far enough. The handle was in her hand. She pulled. The door came up on counterweighted hinges that were well made and well maintained. The movement was smooth. Despite the years, the springs properly tensioned the mechanism, opening fully and locking in position. Below it, a staircase. Metal open grate descending into a darkness that smelled of dry, still air, and something she couldn't immediately identify. She got her flashlight from the backpack. It was a good flashlight, heavy duty, the kind that was worth the weight. She had made that calculation years ago, that the weight of a quality flashlight was worth carrying, because the alternative was a phone screen, in a situation where a phone screen was not going to be sufficient. She clicked it on. 12 steps. At the bottom, she stopped. The beam reached the far wall and then kept looking for a far wall, because the far wall was not where she expected it to be. She swept the beam left and then right. The space was enormous. The same footprint as the building above, or close to it. The same arc, the same proportions, but below ground, finished with concrete walls and metal shelving that ran from the floor to a ceiling that was high enough to stand in without stooping, and would have been high enough to fit someone taller than Tess without issue. On those shelves, everything. She walked to the nearest section and put her light on it. Canned goods, stacked in careful rows, labeled by hand in block print that she did not yet have a name for, but would come to know. Beans, corn, tomatoes, soup, peaches, green beans, pineapple, chicken, tuna, beef. She moved the beam slowly along the shelf. More. All of it in good condition, the cans intact, the labels still readable, organized by type, and within each type by date, newest toward the front, oldest toward the back. She pulled one from the front. Beans. The date on the label was 3 years ago. Not old stores, rotated stores. She moved to the next section. Water. 5-gallon containers, the heavy-duty blue kind designed for emergency storage, stacked 6 containers high on shelving, reinforced to carry the weight. She counted the stacks that were visible from where she stood. 40 plus more farther back in the space. 200 gallons of water visible from one position in the room. Medical supplies. A section of shelving organized the way the pharmacies she had visited organized their back room inventory, grouped by category, within category by type, within type by date. Bandages. Antiseptic, nitrile gloves in small, medium, large, and extra large. Pain reliever, cold and flu medication, antacid, allergy medication, wound closure strips, and she stopped. And an entire section of asthma medication, rescue inhalers, multiple brands, still in original manufacturer packaging, unopened. She stood in front of that shelf for a moment. She was 17 years old, and she had been calculating resources every day of her life. She knew exactly what she had at any given moment, and what the implications of that number were for what came next. She had never had reserves. She had never been in a position to look at a supply of anything and understand herself as having enough plus additional. What she was looking at was not a cache, it was a system, designed by someone who understood systems, maintained by someone with the discipline to keep it current, built for a duration rather than a moment. She walked further into the space, past a generator large commercial, the kind used for small businesses and emergency facilities, wired into what appeared to be the main electrical panel for the building above. Past a section of hand tools organized on pegboard, every hook occupied everything in its place. Past water filtration equipment more sophisticated than she had expected, with filtration canisters that had been replaced recently enough that the freshness was visible. Past improbably a section of shelving containing paperback books, organized loosely by genre fiction on the left, non-fiction on the right, field guides and reference material on a separate shorter shelf at the end. And then she came to the table. It was in the center of the space, at the point where the three underground A sections met in their arc. A single wooden table, plain construction, sturdy, with two chairs rather than one. She would notice the second chair later and understand what it meant. On the table, a battery-powered lantern, the kind with a long runtime and a broad light. And beside the lantern, a single item, a book. Not a paperback. A hardcover cloth-bound, the cover dark brown and worn smooth at the corners from long handling. The cloth had faded at the spine. She picked it up and felt the weight of it, substantial, well-made, hundreds of pages. Inside the front cover, in the same block print as the shelf labels, "If you've found this, you came in through the kitchen floor. That means you're not a scrapper or a developer or a real estate agent. They wouldn't have looked. Have a seat. There's a lot to explain." Harlan Briggs. The lantern had batteries, fresh ones. She tested it, and it came on immediately, the light warm and even, filling the center space and pushing the darkness back to the shelved walls. She sat down in the chair, put the journal on the table in front of her, opened it to the first page. Above her, she could hear Junie walking carefully through the dining room, her footsteps recognizable, the slightly uneven rhythm of someone navigating an unfamiliar space, testing each footfall. Moving from booth to booth, the way Junie moved through any new place building, her map of it systematically. She began to read. Junie came down the stairs, 20 minutes later, moving carefully with her hand on the metal railing, her phone screen providing light until she saw the lantern and navigated toward it. She reached the bottom and stopped. She shone her phone light slowly around the space, the shelving, the water containers, the medical section, the generator. She walked to the medical section and put her light on the asthma medications. She read the labels on each brand. She picked up one of the rescue inhalers and looked at it. "These are the right kind," she said. "I know," Tess said without looking up. Junie set the inhaler back carefully. She came to the table and looked at the journal in Tess's hands, and looked at the shelves around them, and looked at the ceiling, which was the underside of the Empress of Crossroads. "He built all of this," she said. "He spent 40 years building it," Tess said. "I'm still reading." There was a folding stool leaning against the wall near the base of the stairs. Junie retrieved it, set it up beside the chair, and sat down. Neither of them spoke. Above them, the October wind moved across the Wyoming plain in the beginning of what would be a cold night. The compass rose at the top of the tower caught the last of the afternoon light. Below, in the warm circle of a battery lantern, Tess read the words of a man she had never met and understood with a certainty she could not have fully explained that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. That night, Tess found the crackers in her jacket pocket. She had been saving half a sleeve of them from the bus, a habit she had developed without consciously deciding to the way you developed the habits that kept you functioning, and she split them with Junie over the journal. They ate quietly, the crackers insufficient by any reasonable measure, but better than nothing, which was the category they had been living in for a while. She made a note to herself when Lyle or anyone else came tomorrow, she would need to figure out the food situation for real. The stores in the basement were Harlan's, and she had not yet decided what that meant for whether she could use them. She was working on that question. For now, crackers, and the certain knowledge that there were rescue inhalers 20 feet away, was not the worst position she had been in. Junie fell asleep against the side of the table. Tess covered her with the emergency blanket from the pack and kept reading. The journal was 340 pages. She knew because she counted them, which took a moment away from the reading, but felt important she wanted to know the scope of what she was working with before she worked with it. She read the first 60 pages that night and stopped at dawn. The morning light came down the open stairs. Gradually the gray-blue of a Wyoming dawn preceding the actual sun by enough time that she was aware of it changing before she was fully conscious of having noticed it changing. She closed the journal. Junie was still asleep. She went upstairs and into the kitchen and turned the cold water tap on to let it run clear before she filled her water bottle. The pipes were still connected to the main, still functional, though the water pressure was low in the way of water that had been sitting in pipes for a while. She drank, filled the bottle, went to the main car, and stood at one of the long windows looking east. Wyoming morning, the sky going from gray to pale blue to the particular clear blue of high altitude in autumn. The plain in every direction, the grass moving in currents of wind that started somewhere she couldn't see. A paved road. The horizon so far away it seemed like a concept rather than a feature. She heard the truck before she saw it. A green pickup, older model coming slowly down the state road from the direction of Millhaven. It turned into the parking lot of the Empress. Without hesitating, the turn was made with the confidence of someone who had made it many times and stopped. The engine went off. A moment passed. Then the door opened and a man got out. 70s. Work coat dark green, the kind that had been worn through enough seasons to conform to its owner. Work boots with actual dirt on them. He moved with the deliberate care of a man in his 70s who had worked physical jobs for decades and understood his own tolerances. He reached back into the truck cab and came out with a covered dish, the kind of ceramic-covered dish that implied someone had cooked something recently and specifically. He crossed the parking lot. He was looking at the building as he walked, reading it in the way of someone seeing something they had last seen a while ago and checking whether it was still what they remembered. She went to the front door and opened it before he reached it. He stopped. He was looking at her face, not casually, with the focused attention of a person processing something unexpected by means of the method they used for processing unexpected things, which in his case appeared to be stillness and patience. "I'm Tess Varn," she said. "I bought this property." He was quiet for a moment that lasted long enough to be deliberate. "I know," he said. "Beverly at the county office called me this morning. Well, she called me at 6:30, which is morning for most people." He looked at the covered dish in his hand. "I'm Lyle Odom. I have the general store down the road in Millhaven. I've been keeping an eye on this place, in an unofficial capacity." He paused. "I knew Harlan." She stepped back from the door. He came in. He set the dish on one of the counter tables, and she pulled up a stool and sat across from him in the nearest booth. He removed the cover from the dish. Scrambled eggs, toast on the side wrapped in a clean cloth to keep the warmth in. Salt and pepper packets, the kind from a restaurant supply, tucked against the cloth. She hadn't expected this, and found that it required a moment to accept. Not the food which she needed, and was glad of, but the manner in which it was being offered. Without ceremony. Without the performance of generosity that she had sometimes encountered, the presentation of help that was as much about the helper as the helped. He had simply brought food and set it on the table. Junie appeared from the kitchen. She looked at Lyle. He looked at her. "Hello," Junie said. "Hello," he said. Junie sat beside Tess and ate with the focused efficiency of someone who had learned not to leave food on the plate. Lyle sat across from them and watched them eat with the ease of a man who understood that watching people eat was sometimes the most useful thing you could offer. "You found the room," he said. It was not a question. "Last night," Tess said. He nodded slowly. "Harlan told me it existed," he said. "Years ago. He never showed me. He said it was something that needed to be private, that if it was going to work the way he intended it to work, people needed to discover it rather than be told about it. But he told me there was a room under the kitchen, and that he'd been working on it for a long time." He looked at his hands on the table. "I kept the supplies current after he passed. He had a rotation schedule written out. I followed it." Tess thought about the fresh batteries in the lantern, about the dates on the newest cans. "The batteries in the lantern," she said. "The recent dates on the food." "The last 3 years, yes," he said. "He passed in the fall of 2022. I said I'd keep the place up." "Why?" He considered the question with the same stillness he had brought to looking at her face. "Because it was the right thing," he said. "Because that's what he would have wanted, and because—" He stopped, then chose a different approach. "I want to tell you about Harlan, about what he built and why he built it. And part of that will answer the question about why I've been coming out here. But I want to do it right." She nodded. He told her. Harlan Briggs had been born in 1924 in a small Colorado town that had since been absorbed into a larger municipality, the kind of disappearance that happened to small places without fanfare. He had enlisted in 1942 when he was 17, lying about his age, in the way young men lied about their ages in wartime when they had made up their minds. He had come back in 1945. He never talked about what he saw over there, Lyle said. Not in my experience. What he talked about was what he understood when he came back. The difference between places that were prepared, that had what they needed, and the places that weren't and didn't. He'd seen a lot of both. He came home with very strong opinions about which one he intended to live in. The Empress itself. Lyle told the story of the building with the reverence of someone who had grown up knowing it and understood what it represented. The 3 railroad cars specified and selected by Harlan personally from the rail yard. The arc configuration that Harlan had insisted on when the fabricator in Cheyenne had suggested a straight connection would be simpler. He said a straight diner was a missed opportunity, Lyle said. He said the whole point was for people to be able to see each other, to sit in a curve and see the person 3 seats down and across. He said that when you could see each other, the conversation happened differently. He looked down the length of the curved counter. He was right about that. I ate here more times than I can count, and every time I felt like I could see everybody in the room and everybody could see me. The tower had been added a year after the opening, an afterthought that became the point. Harlan had wanted something visible from a long distance, something that told you the place was there before you were close enough to read a sign. He said a man driving a truck for 14 hours needed to see something worth stopping for, Lyle said. He said a sign was information. The tower told you the place had a sense of itself. The neon had come in stages throughout the 50s, added as the business generated the funds for it. The man from Cheyenne who installed it had come back 7 times over a decade. When all of it was running, you could see the Empress from 4 miles on a clear night, Lyle said. I saw it myself when I was a boy. We'd be coming back from somewhere in the dark, and my father would point it out. He said it was how you knew you were almost home. When did it close? Tess asked. 2009. Harlan was 85. He'd had some health trouble, and the building needed work. He didn't have the energy to manage alone. But he didn't close it and walk away. Closing it was how he started working on the other thing full-time. The basement, Tess said. He'd been building it since the 60s, Lyle said. Slowly in pieces, doing it himself. But the last 15 years of his life, that's what he did every day. 6 hours a day until about 3 years before he died, when he had to cut back to 4. He was 90 years old, and he was still down there every day. Tess thought about a man of 90 carrying inventory down 12 metal stairs 4 hours a day. He wouldn't take help, Lyle said. I offered. Others offered. He said it was something he needed to do himself, and he said it in a way that told you not to push it. There was more to tell. Lyle told it in the way that he seemed to do most things without hurrying, giving each part its weight. He talked about what Harlan had understood about the region, about the distances between people out here in the Wyoming high plains, about what happened when a storm hit and the roads went out, about a flood in a county to the north in 1987 that had isolated 12 rural families for 9 days, about a winter storm in 1993 that had cut power to a third of Millhaven County for a week. He used to say he couldn't fix the weather, Lyle said. He said all he could do was make sure that when the weather did what it did, the people around here had somewhere to go, that had what they needed. Junie had finished eating and was sitting sideways in the booth, one knee pulled up, looking out the windows at the Wyoming morning, which had fully arrived, now the sky clear and cold and impossibly wide. Tell me about Rosa, Tess said. Lyle went still. He looked at his coffee. She had found a camp percolator in the supply room below and made coffee on the small camp stove from her pack, which was not a perfect solution, but was a functional one. And he turned the mug in his hands for a moment, not drinking. the specific gesture of a person gathering the words for something they had been carrying a long time. Rosa came to Millhaven in the summer of 2006, he said. June, I think. Or maybe late May. The weather had turned warm, I remember that. She came into my store and said she was looking for work. She was young, 20, maybe 21. She wasn't from here. Originally, she didn't have the look of it, and she didn't know the roads. He paused. She didn't have much, I could see that, but she held herself straight, and she looked you in the eye when she spoke, and she asked for work rather than anything else. He told it carefully, the way you told things that had weight, watching where you placed each piece. Harlan's Empress was still open then, barely with Lyle's help, and the help of a woman named Dottie, who had worked there for 30 years, the two of them managing a 6-day week between them. Lyle had sent Rosa to Harlan. Harlan had hired her immediately without asking many questions. Rosa had worked there from June through September. She was good at it, Lyle said. Fast, good with people. She understood what a diner was for not just the food, but the other thing, the reason people came. She had that instinct. He paused. Harlan liked her, which mattered because Harlan had particular views about people, and once he formed them, they tended to stay formed. Rosa had left in September. She had told Harlan she needed to go back to Ohio. She had not said much more than that, and he had not pressed her. After she left, Lyle said, he started asking questions, not of me at first, of people who had known her. He said he thought he'd missed something, that there was something she hadn't told him. He paused. He hired someone, an investigator, after a few years. He found her. And then he stopped. He put the coffee down. She had died, he said. In 2013, a car accident outside Columbus, Ohio. The words sat in the air of the old dining car. Tess looked at the windows, the plane outside, the specific quality of Wyoming light in the morning. She had children, Lyle said. 2 daughters in the foster care system in Columbus. He found that out too. It took a long time, the records were sealed, and he had to find people who knew how to find things that were sealed. But he didn't stop. He looked at Tess's face directly. He found out the names about 3 years before he died. He put it in the journal. He stopped. He waited for her to respond. She did not respond immediately. I didn't know the names until this morning, he said. Beverly told me from the auction documentation. And then I came out here and I saw you in the door and... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The resemblance was what it was, and they both understood it. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the journal. Tell me about the last section, she said. I read it last night, but I want to hear it from you. He took the journal. He turned to the section she indicated, the last 40 pages, where the handwriting had changed slower, the letters formed with more deliberation, the writing of someone in his 90s, who was still precise, but for whom precision required more effort than it once had. He read. He moved his lips slightly on the important parts, the habit of someone, for whom reading had always been something you did with your whole self rather than just your eyes. When he finished, he closed the journal and set it on the table between them. He was quiet for a long moment. The last entry, the one she had read in the small hours sitting under the lantern in the room Harlan had spent 40 years building. Their names are Tess and Junie. I set the minimum bid at $1. I set the auction duration at 14 days with 68 hours remaining. When I activated it, timed to close on the evening of October 14th. Teresa Varn turns 18 on October 13th. I know this from the records that were not always sealed. If she finds this in time, she'll know what to do with it. If she doesn't find it, someone else will find it. And whatever they do with it will be what it becomes. I built this for the valley, whoever's in it, but I hope it's her. That's Harlan, Lyle said after a moment. His voice was quieter than it had been. He set it all up. He did everything he could think of to do, and then he made a small motion with his hand, a gesture of release. He let it go. He couldn't control who came. He could only make it possible. The front door opened. None of them had heard a car. But the door opened and a woman came in, and she stopped when she saw all of them, and her expression did something complicated that Tess read but did not immediately categorize. She was in her early 70s, small with white hair, cut short and practical. She wore a coat that was slightly too heavy for the morning temperature, the kind of coat you pulled on before you stopped to think about whether you needed it. In one hand, a purse. In the other, held with the careful deliberateness of something being carried at an appropriate pace, a plain white envelope. Dottie, Lyle said. He said it the way you said the name of someone you had been expecting without knowing you were expecting them. Dottie Farrow stood just inside the door of the Empress of Crossroads and looked at Tess. Not at the building, not at the booth where Lyle was sitting, at Tess. The way she looked was not surprise. Surprise was a reaction to something unexpected, and whatever Dottie was experiencing when she looked at Tess, surprise was not it. It was something that had been sitting in her for a long time, something with weight and age, something that recognized what it was looking at. "Sit down," Lyle said gently. She sat. Not at the booth with them, she chose a stool at the counter 5 feet from the table, as though she needed a small amount of space between herself and what she was about to say. She set her purse on the counter. She set the envelope beside it and left her hand near it without touching it. She looked at Tess. "I heard from Beverly this morning," she said. Her voice was steady, the steadiness of someone who had been practicing what she was about to say for longer than the morning. And then Lyle called. She looked at the journal on the table. "You found the room." "Last night," Tess said. Dottie looked at the envelope. She did not touch it. "I was here," she said, "when Rosa was here. I had worked for Harlan for 30 years by that point. I knew this place the way you knew a place you'd spent 30 years in, not just the layout, but the way it breathed." She paused. "I knew Rosa." She said it simply, not gently or dramatically, with the weight of a fact she had been carrying for 17 years. "She was here all summer," Dottie said. "From June to September. I worked alongside her every day. I knew her the way you knew someone you worked with every day, not everything, but the important things. The way she moved, and the way she thought, and the way she was with people." She paused. She was going through something that summer, something she didn't talk about, something she was carrying the way you carried things you didn't have anyone safe to put them down with. She stopped. She touched the edge of the envelope, not picking it up. "In September, a few weeks before she left, she came to me," Dottie said. She had something she needed me to do. She asked me to hold on to a letter. She said she knew she couldn't stay. She said if her daughters ever found out about this place, if they ever came here, I should give it to them. The dining car was very quiet. I didn't know how to find them, Dottie said. I tried after Harlan found out Rosa had died. I found out about the accident through him because he was the one with the people who could find things. I tried to locate the girls, but the records were sealed, and I didn't have the means to get around that. She stopped. She looked at the envelope. I was afraid. I want to tell you that plainly. I was afraid of what I'd find. I was afraid of what it would mean. I kept telling myself I'd do it when I figured out how, and the years went by, and I didn't. She looked at Tess directly. You came to me, she said, which I didn't expect. I thought if it ever happened, it would be because I found a way to reach you. But you came here, and I recognized you the moment Lyle described you. She pressed her lips together. I'm sorry. That's what I have to say first. I have been sorry for 17 years, and I never had anyone to say it to who it mattered to. I'm saying it now because it matters now. She pushed the envelope across the counter. I've had this for 17 years, she said. On the envelope in handwriting that Tess had never seen but would come to know by feel a few words. For my girls, if you find this. Tess looked at the envelope. She did not pick it up yet. She was not afraid of it. She wanted to be clear about that, at least to herself. She had been afraid of many things in her life, genuinely afraid, the practical fear that sharpened your attention and told you what to do next. This was something else, something that needed a particular kind of ground to be solid under it before it could be received properly. The ground was not solid yet in the way it needed to be. She looked at Dottie. Thank you for keeping it, she said. Dottie nodded once. Her eyes were wet, and she did not wipe them. Tess left the envelope on the counter. There's something else coming, Lyle said. He had waited until Dottie was settled, until the room had absorbed what had just happened. Now his voice had shifted to the practical register that Tess recognized as the register of information that required action. Beverly told me something when she called, he said. Other interested parties. I didn't ask for details because Beverly can't provide details, but I know who it is. He paused. Miriam Briggs Colt. She's Harlan's grandniece. Only living blood relation. She lives in Cheyenne, and she has lawyers. He looked at Tess steadily. She's coming this afternoon, he said. Miriam Briggs Colt arrived at 2 o'clock in a silver car with Cheyenne plates that was clean and new enough to look wrong in the parking lot against the cracked asphalt and the weeds. She got out first. 55. Tess estimated the age she had been guessing since Lyle said the name. A professional coat, the kind that was expensive but intended to look practical. Good shoes that were already wrong for the parking lot gravel. She looked at the building the way you looked at something you were measuring for a specific purpose. 2 men got out after her. Suits. One carried a briefcase, the other carried a folder. The clothes of people who worked in buildings in cities and had driven to Mill Haven because someone who paid them had sent them here. Lyle had moved to the front of the main car and was standing near the door. Dottie had gone to the far end and was sitting in the last booth, not eating, just sitting. Tess opened the door before Miriam reached it. "The lawyers stay outside," she said. Miriam looked at her. Something shifted in her expression. Not surprise exactly, more like the recalibration of someone who had prepared for a particular kind of conversation and understood in the first 5 seconds that this one was different. "They're here in an advisory capacity," Miriam said. "This is a private building," Tess said. "You're welcome to come in. Your advisors can wait by the car." A moment passed. Miriam looked at Tess's face. Then she looked past her at the interior of the Empress, at the curved counter, and the red booths, and the jukebox, and the windows looking out at the Wyoming plain. "Fine," she said. She came in. The lawyers stayed. They sat across from each other in the booth nearest the door. Miriam had the leather portfolio she'd carried in from the car. She set it on the table. She did not open it immediately. "I'm going to be direct with you," she said. "My family has had a complicated relationship with this property for a long time. Harlan and I were not close. There's a significant age difference, and he was difficult to know in the specific way that certain people are difficult to know. But he was the last of that generation of my family, and this property is the last significant asset of his estate." "It's not part of his estate," Tess said. "It was sold at auction." "For $1. That was the minimum bid. No one else bid." Miriam opened the portfolio. She produced a document several pages stapled. The auction was structured unusually. A starting bid that low, a duration that long, activated at a specific time. My attorneys believe the structure was designed to limit competitive bidding, which raises questions about the validity. "It raised the minimum bid to the minimum that county regulations allow," Tess said. $1 is a legal minimum bid. 14 days is within the legal auction duration range. All of those parameters were set by the county, not by the estate. Miriam looked at her. This time the recalibration was more visible. "You've done your research," she said. "I've read the county auction regulations," Tess said. "I looked them up last night." She had read the entire county auction code on her phone in the underground room, while Junie slept between reading sections of the journal. It was 12 pages. She had taken notes. "There's also the matter of your capacity to enter into a real property transaction," Miriam said. She took out a different document. "You're 18 years old. Your guardianship paperwork covers your minor sister, not yourself. There's a question about whether a transaction of this. 18-year-olds can legally enter into property transactions in Wyoming," Tess said. "I confirmed this with the county clerk before." She stamped the paperwork. Miriam's jaw shifted slightly. The specific movement of someone who has had a series of intended advantages denied and is reassessing their position. "There's also an offer on the table," she said. She produced a third document. Clean letterhead, a number, $500,000. "Clearpath Energy has been interested in this parcel for wind resource development. Given the location and the acreage this represents fair market." "I'm not selling," Tess said. Miriam looked at her. "You have—" She stopped, started differently. "You're an 18-year-old from Ohio with limited resources and a minor sister with a medical condition. The property needs significant work. The costs of maintaining and operating a structure of this size." "I understand the costs," Tess said. "I understand what I have. I'm not selling. There will be legal proceedings, Miriam said. It was not a threat. It was a statement of fact delivered in the flat tone of someone informing you of the weather. There may be, Tess said. That's your choice to make. Miriam looked at the building around her again. At the length of the counter, the quality of the chrome, the jukebox in the corner. At Dottie in the far booth, who had not moved and was not looking at them. At Lyle, who had positioned himself with the particular stillness of someone who was present and bearing witness. I will tell you, Miriam said in a slightly different voice, not softer exactly, but less armored, that I was brought here once when I was a child. I was 6 years old. I don't remember much about Harlan. I was too young and he was not an easy person for a child to connect with. But I remember the lights. She said it quietly. Not to Tess, particularly. More to the building. I remember what it looked like when the lights were on, she said. She picked up the portfolio and the documents and stood up. I'll be in contact through my attorneys, she said. She left. The silver car left. The parking lot was empty again. Lyle let out a slow breath. She's not entirely wrong about the practical challenges, he said. I know, Tess said. Harlan thought about this, Lyle said. He reached into his coat pocket and produced an envelope. Business-sized her name, typed on the front rather than handwritten. He left this with Faye Holloway. She's a lawyer in Casper. She handled all his estate work. Instructions were to deliver it to the auction winner. He held it out. There's an account number in there. She took the envelope. She did not open it yet. She had a system, one thing at a time. The things that were done needed to be absorbed before the next thing. She put the envelope in her jacket pocket next to the inhaler. That evening, Weston Colt arrived. She heard the truck, first an older model. The engine different in its sound from Miriam's car, more worn and more comfortable with itself. It parked, and the engine cut off, and there was a pause. Then the door opened, and a man got out, late 20s. He walked toward the Empress with the walk of someone who had something to say, and wasn't entirely certain of his welcome. He was not one of the 2 lawyers who had come with Miriam. He was younger than both of them, and he was alone. And he was carrying a folder, and the folder had the look of something he had put together himself, rather than something produced by a legal department. Tess opened the door. He looked at her. He had his mother's eyes, the same dark gray, the same particular set to them. She recognized it now, having spent time looking at Miriam's face across a booth. I'm Weston Colt, he said. Miriam's son. I know you met her today. Yes, Tess said. I need you to know I'm not here on her behalf, he said. She doesn't know I'm here. We don't exactly see eye to eye about this property, which is a recent development. He paused. I'm a property lawyer. I work in Cheyenne. I found out about the journal and the will last year when I was doing some pro bono work that involved looking at county estate filings. I found the filing Harlan had made a partial copy of the journal, the last section filed as part of the estate documentation. You have to know what to look for and know how to look for it. I did. He held up the folder. Everything my mother is going to try to use against your claim is addressed in here, he said. Harlan anticipated it. All of it. He executed a notarized will specifying the auction structure and the intended recipient and explicitly addressing blood relation challenges. He filed it in a way that required a property lawyer to find it, which meant anyone challenging the auction would send a property lawyer, and the property lawyer would find the documents that made the challenge impossible. He looked at her steadily. "I'd like to help you," he said. "My mother is going to pursue this. She has the resources to make it difficult. I know the documents and I know the arguments, and I'm good at this." "Why?" Tess said. "She's your mother." "She is," he said, "and she's doing something that isn't right. I've told her that. She disagrees." He paused. "I also read the last 40 pages of that journal. The version in the filing isn't complete. There are sections he redacted for the filing, but what's there is enough." He looked at the Empress around them. "He knew you were coming. He set it up for you. The least I can do is make sure what he set up holds." Tess looked at him for a moment, reading him the way she read people, not looking for a specific thing, but letting the total picture form. "Come in," she said. "There's coffee." He came in. He looked at the building the way Tess had looked at it when she first arrived, taking inventory, building the map. He looked at Lyle, who had returned after dinner, at Dottie, who was still there, at Junie in the corner, who looked at him once and then returned to the paperback she was reading. He sat down. Tess poured coffee and set it in front of him and sat across from him and opened the folder. They worked until late. Outside, the Wyoming night settled in around the Empress, and the compass rose on the tower caught the starlight, and 47 neon tubes waited in the dark for the moment when they would not be dark anymore. The hearing was scheduled for November 14th. Weston filed the response to Miriam's petition on a Tuesday morning, and by Wednesday afternoon, the Millhaven County Court had set the date, 3 weeks away. Tess used them. The generator came online on day 2. A technician from Casper drove out and replaced 2 components that had degraded and demonstrated the panel operation, and Tess took notes on everything. She was systematic about the notes. She always had been. Notes were how you remembered the things that would matter later, when the situation had changed and the urgency had passed. The electrical work in the main building took most of the first week. The wiring was original 1947 work, which was good original work. Whoever had wired the Empress had known what they were doing, but it was 77 years old, and some of it needed to be replaced rather than just inspected. A contractor named Ted drove up from Millhaven every morning and worked silently and well. Weston reviewed the bill and confirmed it was fair. The account Harlan had set aside was in the Millhaven County Bank. She looked at the number once and then put the account book away and did not look at it again until she had a specific use for it. Having more money than she had ever had in her life required a period of adjustment. She had learned to manage scarcity. Sufficiency was a different skill, and she was going to need to learn it, but not all at once. Weston was in Millhaven 4 days a week. He worked from the back booth with his laptop and handled her case alongside 3 others he maintained simultaneously. He did not present a bill. She did not ask why. Some things were better understood through action over time than through conversation. Lyle came every morning. This became a pattern without announcement. He arrived, he brought food, he stayed for as long as he was useful, he left. the pattern of a person who had been doing things that needed doing for so long that helpfulness had become involuntary. Dottie came frequently. She and Junie developed something in those early weeks that Tess could see without being able to fully describe. Not friendship in the conventional sense, the age difference was too large for that 57 years of lived experience between them. But a transmission. Dottie had spent 30 years running the practical operations of the Empress, and she carried that knowledge in her hands and her habits, and Junie absorbed knowledge the way certain materials absorbed light completely without waste, converting it immediately into something functional. By the end of the second week, Junie could name every piece of kitchen equipment, its function, its maintenance schedule, and the order in which operations needed to happen at opening and closing. Tess found this out by accident, walking through the kitchen on an evening, and hearing Junie explain the commercial range to Weston, who was listening with the expression of a man who had not planned to spend his Thursday evening learning about cast iron grates, but was finding the instruction more interesting than expected. The letter from Rosa remained on the counter. It was there every day. Neither of them spoke about it. Neither of them avoided looking at it. It was in the main car, on the counter, visible from most positions in the room. They were both aware of it, the way you were aware of something that was waiting for the right time, without knowing in advance what the right time would feel like when it arrived. Tess was not afraid of it. She kept returning to that fact, checking it the way you checked something you wanted to be sure about. She was not afraid. She was something more patient than afraid. She was waiting to be ready in the specific way that she had learned to wait for things, not passively, not while standing still, but while moving forward on everything else, so that when the readiness arrived, the ground would be stable enough to receive it on. November moved through its first 2 weeks with the urgency of Wyoming in autumn, which was the urgency of a season that had something to prove. The temperature dropped sharply between the 1st and the 14th. The sky changed from the high, clear blue of early autumn to something lower and heavier, the kind of sky that was not just overcast, but occupied by weather that was forming somewhere and moving in a direction. On the morning of November 12th, 2 days before the hearing, Tess came downstairs at 6 and found Lyle already in the parking lot, standing still, looking north. She put on her coat and went out. The sky in the north was a white-gray that had depth in it, not the flat gray of overcast, but something three-dimensional. Something with weather inside it. The wind was coming from a direction it didn't usually come from in the morning. "When?" she said. "National Weather Service says 48 hours, Lyle said. "But it's moving faster than the models predicted. I'd put it at 36, maybe less." He looked at her. "You should know what this means out here. When the roads go, they go." She thought about the building behind her, about the generator running on its full charge, about the shelves below and what was on them, about Harlan's rotation schedule, which she had followed to the letter since she understood it, and what it meant that she had. "How many people in the rural routes who might be in trouble," she said. "If the roads close, maybe 100 households that lose power and heat. Half of them are prepared generators, backup fuel stores. The other half..." He paused. "The elderly, the people on fixed incomes who don't have the means to prepare the families who moved out here recently and don't know yet what the winter can do." She looked at the Empress. "The basement can hold 60 people," she said. "Harlan said so in the journal." "He designed it that way," Lyle said. 60 minimum. "Get word out," she said. "Tell people the Empress is open." He looked at her. She had not said those words before. They landed in her chest with a weight she hadn't anticipated. "I'll start calling," he said. The storm arrived at 3 in the morning on the 13th. It did not arrive gradually. It arrived the way Wyoming storms arrived, which was completely and immediately the wind hitting the steel walls of the Empress in a way she had never heard before and would never forget. Not the familiar sound of wind against wood or brick or glass, but the sound of air striking metal, a resonance that traveled through the structure and could be felt as much as heard. She had not slept. She had spent the night in a state of productive wakefulness, moving through the building with her lists. What they had, what they could accommodate, what the generator would sustain for how long under what load, what the medical supplies covered, what sequence of events needed to happen when people started arriving, and in what order, and who would handle what part of it. People had been coming in since 8 the previous evening, when Lyle's calls had gone out. Some came immediately, some came after calling neighbors. Some were brought by Sheriff May Cord in her truck, making runs on the county roads while they were still passable. May Cord was a woman in her mid-40s, with the economy of movement and speech that came from 15 years of emergency work in a county with large distances and limited resources. She drove her truck in the efficient pattern of someone who knew every road and what it looked like in weather and what it would look like in worse weather, and she kept driving until the roads told her to stop. By midnight, there were 22 people in the Empress. By 2 in the morning, 31. By the time the storm hit at 3:36, people were settled in the booths and on the sleeping pads that had come up from the supply room and in the chairs arranged near the kitchen pass-through. Dottie had organized the feeding operation with the authority of someone who had spent 30 years feeding large groups in this kitchen and knew exactly what she was doing. Lyle handled the practical logistics of the space, who needed what, where, to put whom, which of the elderly residents needed to be nearest the warmest section of the room. Weston, who had stayed when the weather reports changed, turned out to have the quality of a person who was genuinely useful in an emergency. Without needing to direct it, he found the task that needed doing and did it. And Junie. Tess noticed it in stages, the way you noticed something that was happening at the edge of your direct attention. She was moving through the building doing the things that needed doing. The generator check, the medical supply inventory, the water situation, and she kept registering Junie at the edge of her awareness. Junie in the kitchen explaining the water heating protocol to a woman who had arrived with nothing but a coat and a granddaughter. Junie moving through the sleeping arrangements with the specific systematic intelligence that meant she had thought about this before it became necessary and was executing the plan she had already made. Junie. In the corner of the main car, sitting on the floor with 3 children under 8, reading from a paperback that had come up from the supply room doing voices for each character. She stopped in the pass-through and looked at that for a moment. Junie with her inhaler in her pocket and the asthma quiet in her chest. Junie with 3 children. arrayed around her in the postures of children who had given themselves over to a story, one leaning against her shoulder, one with knees pulled up, one on his stomach with his chin in his hands. Junie's voice moving through the characters with the ease of someone who loved books in the specific way that meant she had spent her whole life inside them. She had been watching Junie for so long, watching for the wheeze and the signs and the signals that meant reach for the inhaler or reach for the phone, that she had been doing less of a different kind of watching. The kind that registered what Junie was becoming, not just the body that needed watching, but the person that body contained. She turned and went back to what she had been doing. At 4:17 in the morning, Weston appeared at her elbow. "My mother's car is on the county GPS system," he said. He showed her his phone. A map, the county road system overlaid with moving dots that were the vehicles registered to the county emergency network. One dot was stopped 3 miles east of the Empress on the state road. "She was driving in from Cheyenne," he said. "She texted me 20 minutes ago. She said she went into the ditch. After that, nothing, the signal dropped." She looked at the map. She visualized the road. There was a low section, poor drainage, a slight curve, where the road dropped toward a dry creek bed. In ice and wind, with city tires and unfamiliar conditions, it would be easy to lose traction. She was already moving toward the coat rack. "You don't have to," Weston said. "Hand me those," she said, indicating the work gloves on the shelf. "And that flashlight." She was pulling on the heavy coat, the serious one that Lyle had brought her a week after she arrived, saying that what she had from Ohio was insufficient for what Wyoming was going to do. "Tell Lyle where I'm going." "She's the one trying to take your building," he said. It was not an argument. He said it the way you said something you needed to say in order to clear it out of the way. "She's in a ditch in a blizzard," Tess said. She did not say more than that. The statement was complete. It was not complicated except in the way that all simple things were complicated if you went far enough into them. She had read Harlan Briggs's journal. She knew what this building had been built for. She knew what the sign above the door said in the lettering from 1947. She had not been carrying that knowledge in a theoretical way. She went out into the storm. The cold was immediate and total. Not like Ohio cold or any cold she had experienced which had been inconvenient or uncomfortable or occasionally difficult. This cold had an intention to it. It hit her face and her hands and looked for every gap in her clothing with the efficiency of something that knew what it was doing. She put her head down and moved east along the shoulder of the road, the flashlight cutting a path through snow that was moving horizontally rather than falling. The wind was irregular, sustained at a level that was serious with gusts that pushed her sideways when they hit. She corrected for each gust and kept moving, one foot, then the other. The shoulder of the road was still distinguishable from the drainage ditch by a slight grade change she could feel through her boots. She followed the grade. She counted steps when the counting helped her stay present, and stopped counting when it stopped helping. The car was 22 minutes from the Empress, off the right shoulder, nose down into the ditch at the angle that meant the rear wheels were slightly off the ground. The headlights were off. The hazard flashers were going the orange pulse, visible through the snow, even at 20 feet. She went to the driver's side window and knocked with the flashlight handle. Miriam Briggs' Colt looked up from inside. She had her coat wrapped around her both hands visible, her breath producing clouds in the interior of the car, where the engine heat had been gone long enough for the temperature to drop significantly. She looked at the window. She looked at who was standing outside it. Whatever she had expected to see when she looked up from the window of a car she had been in for 50 minutes alone, in a Wyoming blizzard, this was apparently not it. She opened the door. "How long have you been here?" Tess said. 50 minutes. The voice was controlled. The voice of a woman who had spent 50 minutes applying everything she had to staying controlled, and it had held, but it had cost something. Maybe an hour. "Can you walk?" She took a moment to assess. "Yes." "The Empress is 1 mile west. Stay directly behind me. Keep moving. Don't stop unless I stop." Miriam got out of the car. She was dressed inadequately for this. The professional coat was well made, but not designed for sustained exposure in these conditions. No gloves. Shoes that had already been wrong for the parking lot gravel, and were dramatically wrong for this. Tess took off her own outer gloves and held them out. Miriam looked at them. She looked at Tess. She looked at the gloves again. She put them on. They walked. There was no room for conversation in sustained 40-plus mile-per-hour wind. Tess set the pace, and Miriam kept it staying close, not complaining, not asking for accommodations. Whatever Tess had expected from Miriam Briggs Colt, in conditions that stripped away everything except what you actually were, this was not worse. The woman was cold and frightened, and she had the discipline to not let either of those things reduce her to helplessness. They made it back in 34 minutes. Lyle had the door open before they reached it. There were people behind him with blankets. Dottie appeared with a mug of something hot, the specific efficiency of someone who had known what would be needed and had started it before the need was confirmed. They moved Miriam to the warmest booth, the one closest to the kitchen pass-through, where the air was several degrees warmer from the range. She was wrapped, given the mug, given space. She was not asked about the legal matter. The storm had a different calendar from the one posted in the courthouse. In the storm in this building, all of that was beside the point. This was the point. This room and these people and this warmth that existed because a man had spent 40 years preparing for exactly this. Weston sat across from his mother in the booth. He looked at her the way a son looked at a mother when the fear was over and what was left was relief and the complicated, unresolved thing that had been between them before the fear. She wrapped her hands around the mug. She looked at the Empress around her, at the 36 people in various states of settlement, some asleep, some talking quietly, some watching the storm through the windows that were now opaque with snow on the glass, at the generator's reliable hum from the connection to the basement, at Junie in the corner reading to children who had fallen asleep, at Dottie moving efficiently between the booths and the kitchen with the knowledge of someone who had spent 3 decades learning exactly how to move in this space. She did not say anything. After a time, Weston put a plain white envelope on the table in front of her. Not Dottie's envelope, a different one, sealed. The handwriting on the front was the block print that Tess had come to know. It said, "For Miriam." "He wrote it 3 years before he died," Weston said. He kept his voice quiet, not because the room was asleep, but because the moment required it. It was filed with the estate documents. I found it the same time I found the journal filing. He paused. I thought you should see the building first, before you read it. Miriam picked up the envelope. She did not open it in the booth. She went to the far end of the dining car, to the last booth, and sat facing the window. The storm on the other side of the glass was a white wall of moving snow. She opened the envelope there alone and read what was inside. Tess did not watch her. There were other things to attend to. The storm peaked around 2 in the morning and began to ease in the way that serious Wyoming storms eased gradually and without apology. By 6, the wind had dropped enough that the county road crew went out, and by 8, the state road was passable. At 6 in the morning, before the road crew's report came through, Miriam Briggs' Colt came to find Tess. Tess was in the supply room going through the inventory, taking stock of what had been used in the night, updating the records in the manner she had understood from Harlan's own documentation, precise and dated. The work was methodical, and it suited the quality of the early morning, the particular kind of attention that was needed when you were tired, but the work mattered. Miriam stood in the doorway. She was holding the letter, still in the envelope, but held the way you held something that had rearranged something. He explained everything, she said. She said it quietly, without the armor she had been wearing when she arrived. He explained Rosa, she said, and why he set up the auction the way he did, and what the building is for, and what he built under it. She looked at the shelves, at the rows of organized supplies, the water, the medical section, at the order and the completeness of it. He said he understood that I would challenge it. He said he'd designed the estate documents to survive the challenge. She paused. He said he hoped that when I saw the building, I would understand why he did what he did, why he gave it the way he gave it. She folded the letter back into the envelope. He also said... She stopped. He said that there were 2 kinds of love, the kind that holds on to things and the kind that gives them away, and that he had been practicing the second kind his whole life. She looked at Tess. He said he wanted me to understand that what he gave away was not a loss, that it was the completion of what he'd been building. She looked at the supply room around her. He asked me, she said, to do one thing. He asked me to be honest with myself about what I came here for and what it would mean if I got it. She was quiet for a moment. I spent last night thinking about that. In the middle of a blizzard in someone else's building, wrapped in someone else's blanket, while a girl I came here to fight fed me hot soup and went out in the storm to pull me out of a ditch. She looked at Tess directly. I know what I came here for, and I know what it would mean. She extended her hand. It was not a small gesture for Miriam Briggs' Colt. Tess understood that. She took the hand and shook it. I'm calling my lawyers this morning, Miriam said. The challenge is being withdrawn. The afternoon hearing was in the Millhaven County Courthouse. Weston's contact Faye Holloway in Casper had rescheduled it to 2 in the afternoon to account for the storm's aftermath, which she did with the efficiency of someone who understood that Wyoming weather required flexibility built into every schedule. The courtroom was a modest room in a modest building. Faye Holloway stood at the table with the ease of someone. who had stood at this kind of table many times and knew exactly what she was doing. Weston sat beside Tess in the gallery. The judge was a man in his 60s with the look of someone who had been hearing rural property cases in Wyoming for long enough to have developed a specific kind of patience. He reviewed the estate documentation, the notarized will, the auction records, the withdrawal of the challenge confirmed by Miriam's attorneys in writing that morning. He looked at Tess. "Ms. Varn," he said. "Yes, sir." "You're 18 years old." "Yes, sir." "You purchased this property for $1 at county auction." "That was the minimum bid, sir. The auction ran 14 days with no other bids." He looked at the paperwork. He looked at Faye Holloway. He looked at the empty chair where Miriam's attorneys were not sitting because they had withdrawn before the hearing began. "The estate documentation is in order," he said. "The auction was properly conducted. The challenge has been withdrawn. The property known as the Empress of Crossroads, parcel 14-892- Millhaven County, Wyoming, is confirmed in the ownership of Teresa Varn." He looked at the guardianship documentation. "The property is to be held in trust for her minor sister, Junie Varn, under the terms of the existing guardianship agreement." He set the paperwork down. "Anything else?" "No, sir," Tess said. "We're adjourned," he said. She sat in Lyle's truck in the courthouse parking lot for a few minutes before they drove back to the Empress. The November afternoon was clear after the storm, the kind of clear that came after serious Wyoming weather. The sky scoured the air completely, itself, nothing soft or ambiguous about any of it. "How do you feel?" Lyle said. She thought about it. She took the questions seriously, the way she took most questions that deserved an honest answer. "Like there's a lot of work to do," she said. He nodded. "There is," he said, "and you'll do it." That night, she read Rosa's letter. She knew it would be that night. Not because the hearing was over. The hearing being over was the kind of external event that cleared a certain type of space, but was not itself the thing that had been waiting. The thing that had been waiting was something she could not name precisely. Some accumulation that she had been watching grow since she had first arrived in Millhaven and understood what this place was and what it had been left for. The ground was solid enough now. The accumulation was complete. She carried the envelope to the booth at the far end of the dining car. The same booth where Miriam had read Harlan's letter 2 nights before. The windows here faced south away from the direction the storm had come from, and the Wyoming night outside was clear in the way that followed a storm. Sharply itself, the stars close, and the dark fully itself, and nothing between you and all of it. She opened the envelope. Rosa's handwriting was smaller than she had expected, slightly rushed the way you wrote when you were writing fast, because the momentum of it needed to be maintained, or the bravery would go. The handwriting of someone 20 years old in the fall of 2006, sitting in a diner in Wyoming, with something she needed to say, and a piece of paper and a pen, and enough courage to start. She read it. She did not stop. She read from the first word to the last, and then she sat with the letter in her hands and looked at the clear Wyoming night through the glass and let what it said find its place inside her. She would not say what the letter contained. That was hers and Junie's. But she would say that it was 3 paragraphs. that the third paragraph was the one she read twice, the one she would carry the longest. A 20-year-old woman's words to daughters she would not see, grow up finding their way to those daughters 17 years later, through a woman who had kept them and a building that had been built to be found. She sat with it for a long time. Then she folded it with care and put it back in the envelope, and held the envelope against her chest for a moment, the way you held something you were not ready to put down. Then she put the envelope in her jacket pocket near the inhaler. She went to find Junie. Her sister was in the supply room updating the rotation inventory. She had a system, a clipboard with Harlan's format, modified by Junie's own annotations, the modifications clear and logical, and better than what they had been before. She was moving between the shelves with the efficiency of someone who had made this space her own. She heard Tess on the stairs and turned. She looked at Tess's face. She looked at the jacket pocket where the envelope was. She came and sat on the bottom step beside her sister. They were quiet for a moment. "Good," Junie said. "Yes," Tess said. She took the envelope from her pocket and held it out. Junie took it. She opened it carefully. She read slowly, moving through the 3 paragraphs with the focused attention she brought to everything she read, and when she finished, she folded the letter the way it had been folded precisely, and held it against her chest with both hands. They sat on the stairs in the basement of the Empress of Crossroads, in the warm light of the supply room, with 40 years of preparation stacked on the shelves around them. They did not speak. There was nothing that needed to be said that the sitting together did not already say. The reopening was in June. It took that long because it needed to take that long. There was the electrical, which required more work than the initial assessment had suggested, not because the original wiring had failed, but because the scale of what Tess was planning to run through it required upgrades that the 1947 system hadn't been designed for. There was the kitchen equipment, some of which could be refurbished and some of which needed to be replaced. The refrigeration. The plumbing, which was mostly sound, but had a section in the connection between the second and third cars that needed to be replumbed. The permits, which were their own category of sustained effort. Multiple agencies, multiple forms, multiple inspections, multiple visits to Millhaven County offices, and one to the state level. She handled all of it with the method that had gotten her through everything else. One document at a time, one form at a time, one agency at a time. When something required expertise she didn't have, she found the person who had it and understood what they were telling her well enough to make the decisions that were hers to make. She was not afraid of things she didn't know. Not knowing was a starting point, not a barrier. The neon was the part she thought about most while she was working on the other things. 47 tubes tracing the outline of the Empress against the Wyoming night sky. She had found a specialist through Lyle's connections, a man who worked out of Denver and who drove up in a van with a scaffolding system and spent 2 weeks on it going tube by tube. He told her with the reverence of someone who had worked with neon professionally for 20 years and understood what he was looking at, that whoever had installed the original system had done so with a level of care and precision that made his work significantly easier. He named a price for the restoration, and she compared it to 3 other estimates she had gathered and found it was fair, and said yes. Weston handled the legal work with the sustained efficiency of someone who was good at what they did and was glad to be using it for something that mattered. The final threat of challenge from Miriam had dissolved in the weeks after the storm with less drama than it might have. Miriam sent a letter in April, not from her attorneys, but from herself, with a check inside it. The note said only, "For the East Wall Electrical." He would have called it an investment. The check covered the East Wall Electrical and the kitchen exhaust system. Dottie became what she had probably always been. At the Empress, the person who knew exactly how the kitchen was supposed to run and made sure it ran that way. Not as an employee initially, as something harder to name a person who came because the work was hers and had always been hers, and who stayed because the work needed to be done by someone who understood what it had been. Junie became the person who knew everything about the supply room and its operation, and who had opinions, increasingly well-founded opinions, about how the kitchen connected to the supply room and how both connected to what the building was supposed to do. Her opinions were good. Tess incorporated them. This was a new experience, incorporating another person's judgment, without having to first overcome the skepticism that came from having been managing alone for so long, and she found that it worked better than managing alone had. The morning of June 14th arrived as Wyoming summer arrived, which was definitively and warmly, the sun already substantive at 6 in the morning, the sky the clear blue of altitude in late spring. Tess was up before the sun. She stood in the parking lot and looked at the Empress in the pre-dawn light, the building absorbing the darkness still and beginning to absorb the first light as it came. She had been here 8 months. She had looked at this building from every angle. In every season it had provided so far. In the specific cold of October, the serious cold of November, the punishing cold of the Wyoming winter that followed. She knew how the building sounded in high wind, and how it sounded in calm, and how it sounded when the temperature dropped quickly. She knew the way the light changed through the long windows at different times of day and different times of year. She had learned the building the way you learned something you were responsible for completely, with the knowledge of its habits and its needs. She went to the electrical panel. She flipped the neon circuits one at a time. She had decided to do it alone before anyone else arrived, because she wanted to be here for this moment, in the specific way you were present for things you needed to be present for, not performing it, not capturing it, just receiving it. The tubes warmed slowly. Neon tubes needed time to reach operating temperature, the gas needing to heat before the light was full and even. She watched them come up. First, the tubes along the roof line of the central car, the red warming from nothing to a thread of light, to the full, deep red she had seen in the 1953 photographs. Then the window frames the white tubes, giving a cooler, brighter light that contrasted with the red the way Harlan had intended when he specified the combination. Then the second car, the third. Then the tower, the white, tracing the tapered steel all the way up, and at the top, the compass rose illuminated from within, the brass of it glowing from the light behind it. 47 tubes. She stood in the parking lot in the Wyoming morning and looked at the Empress of Crossroads lit from within. The 74 meters of curved steel, the The tower rising, the compass rose burning clear against the sky that was just beginning to go from gray to blue to the specific clear blue of this place. It was not modest. Harlan had not built anything modest, and she had not restored it to modesty. It was what it had always been, a claim about itself, a presence, something that made no apologies for existing and asked for no context to justify it. From 4 miles away on a clear Wyoming night, you could see it. Lyle came at 9 with food the way he came every morning. He stopped at the edge of the parking lot when he saw the neon and stood there for a long moment. She did not say anything. Some things were better received in silence. Dottie came. She stood at the door with one hand on the frame and looked at the building from the inside for a long time. May Cord came by on her county rounds and stopped the truck and got out and stood in the parking lot looking at the Empress, and then came inside and had a cup of coffee and said which was the most words she had strung together on a personal topic in Tess's experience of her. He would have liked this. People came all morning. The ranchers who had sheltered in the basement during the storm, the families from the rural routes, the truck driver who had driven 40 minutes out of his way when he read about the opening in the county bulletin, the woman from the Mill Haven diner who had been sending food over with Lyle in the early weeks, children who had heard about the place from their parents and were looking at it with the wide attention of children encountering something they didn't have a category for yet. Junie started the jukebox at 10. They had been uncertain about it until 48 hours before opening, when the technician from Casper had gotten the final mechanism working. It played on the original records which had been stored in the supply room in their original sleeves, and which were in better condition than any of them had any right to expect. The first song was from 1954, a woman's voice and a piano, the kind of music that had been composed for exactly this kind of room and this kind of morning and this kind of people. It came out of the jukebox and went up into the arc of the central car and found the curved ceiling and the curved walls and came back transformed. Not just by the acoustics, though the acoustics were part of it, by everything that had made the room, the chrome and the windows, and the 50 years of cooking smells, and the people in it, and the morning light coming through the long windows. The counter was full. 3 booths were full. More were filling. The parking lot had more cars in it than it had held since the November emergency, and those cars were parked in the casual manner of people who expected to be here for a while. At noon, a truck pulled in. She didn't know the driver. He got out and stood in the parking lot and looked at the Empress, the way everyone looked at it, the necessary pause, the moment of taking it in before moving toward it. Then he came to the door and opened it and looked in. She was behind the counter. He looked at the room, at the people in the booths, and at the counter, and at the jukebox, and at Junie moving efficiently through the kitchen pass-through. He looked at the neon through the windows, burning in the noon sun, which was the time of day it was hardest to see, and when it was visible anyway. He looked at the sign above the door. "Everyone welcome." He looked at Tess. "You open," he said. She looked at the room, at Lyle at the far end of the counter talking to a rancher who had come in for coffee and had not yet found a reason to leave. At Dottie moving through the kitchen with the ease of 30 years of practice and 8 months of returning to it. At Junie, behind the pass-through moving between the range and the prep counter with an efficiency that still surprised Tess every time she watched it. At the compass rose on the wall inside the door, the smaller version that matched the one on the tower the four directions plane. At May Cord, at a middle booth, her radio on the table, doing paperwork, having apparently decided that the booth was as good a place as any to catch up on county business. At the neon 47 tubes, burning in the Wyoming noon. At Junie. Junie looked up from the pass-through. She looked at the truck driver in the door. She looked at Tess. She raised her eyebrows slightly, the question that didn't need words, because they had been reading each other for their whole lives. Tess looked at the man in the door. "Come in," she said. He came in. The door swung shut behind him. The jukebox was playing, and the room was full, and the neon burned in the Wyoming afternoon, and the compass rose above the door, pointed north and south and east and west as it always had, as it had always been designed to, as it would, for as long as the building stood. Everyone welcome.